Hello, and welcome to this episode of the podcast for the Eastbourne Literary Festival, the festival whose mission is to convince you that you are a writer. I'm Russ Miles, a local writer, listener, and festival instigator, and in this podcast I will be chatting to many diverse and interesting writers about how they write in order to inspire you to pick up the pen, keyboard, or even phone and start writing. For this episode, we're joined by the wonderful Molly Anderson, who is the author of the incredible memoir, Dad's New Dress. Molly, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on, Russell.
It's an absolute pleasure. And I think you're probably the first author we've spoken to on this podcast that has written a memoir and so has had that experience of writing something that is very close to your heart. And also writing under a nom de plume, under a name. And I'd be interested to know, this being such a, shall we say, an intimate book, an important book to you personally, how did you go about deciding to write it and deciding to write in the first place, that writing was going to be important to you in respect of what you wanted to share?
So I'll take the first part of that. Why did I start writing? So when my dad told my sister and I that he now wanted to live as a woman, it knocked me sideways, and I found it really hard to cope. And I didn't know what I was feeling for one thing, and I didn't know what to do with those very, very unusual emotions for another. And I sort of trogged along for a couple of years, mental health going up and down, not only linked to the dad, but also to other changes in my life. And then I had this revelation. I said, I think I'm going to write about it. Somebody said to me, do you know, it's such an unusual story. You need to write it. So my husband was walking Hadrian's Wall and I was driving the motorhome. And while he was walking, I got my laptop out and started writing. And that's where it began. And it was a cathartic experience. I use that word not lightly. It really was, because it not only writing helped me cope with the reality of the now, but it also helped me process some of the stuff about my father that I'd never, or I hadn't looked at, or hadn't explored for a long, long time. And that's why I started writing. And you'll have to remind me of the second half of the question.
Yeah, so the second half of the question was about the nom de plume.
Yeah.
Because you are the first person, I believe, on the podcast to have adopted it. I've seen many other authors, I've spoken to other authors outside of the podcast around these sorts of decisions to write under a pen name. But I can imagine for you it was a complicated decision, or maybe it was a very simple decision.
Well, when I first started writing, I just thought, I'm just going to own this. I'm just going to say, well, this is me and I don't care. And then actually it was my sons who said, it's not just you though, is it? Is it, Mum? We're in there. Dad's in there. Your sisters are in there. You need to have a rethink, because actually it's not fair on us, as we want our anonymity. And also it can be quite a controversial topic. Transgender seems to split people down the middle, and getting it wrong and saying the wrong thing hasn't yet, but could have sparked some backlash. And I didn't want my family to be involved in that, and I wanted to protect them. So using the pseudonym protects the anonymity of my family.
That makes perfect sense. It really does. And I'm interested in some of the logistics of writing with that sort of pseudonym, because it must be relatively complicated to be working on something such as this book that's going to be out there in the public domain. People are going to be referring to you with this pseudonym, and you're going to be like we are today on a podcast, and maybe you're incredibly well practiced now about responding to Molly and this being another facet to perhaps you. But in the early days, did you find it difficult to become almost that persona when you're promoting the book, beyond when you've actually written it?
Yeah, I had to remember that I was Molly. So if somebody called, or phoned me and I picked up the phone, I had to say, right, who is this? Which phone is it? First of all, I had two phones. I have to pick up the Molly phone and say, yes, Molly speaking. not my actual name. And that can be quite complicated, but I'm quite used to it now. I know when I'm talking about Dad's new dress, I am Molly. And that's, it's become much easier as time has gone on. And it's only been less than a year, but I can be Molly when I need to be.
And back to writing this memoir, you mentioned cathartic. Did the shape of that catharticism change as you were writing the book? Did you start out? I'm wondering how the emotional journey of writing such a book develops. Because in the last episode, we spoke to Holly Seddon, and she talked about a lot of the joy that she brings to writing her thrillers, her dramas, her fiction. But your writing, I don't think joy would be the word that someone would associate with a cathartic experience of this kind. And I wondered just about the emotional journey, that if you can cast your mind back to how that played out as you went through all the different phases of not just first drafting, but second drafting, revisiting, taking editing advice or input. That must have been enormously interesting from a private memoir kind of point of view as it becomes a consumable published work.
So cathartic was the word. When I got to the end of the first draft, which was in the first person, and I was going to put it out in my own name, I asked a couple of my family members to read it. My sister wouldn't. My brother-in-law did, and he said, "You sound really angry." And I thought, okay, well, maybe I am. Maybe that's what I am. And who's the anger at? Well, my dad. So I didn't do anything about it and sent the first draft to my father, and that landed very badly. I had an email back from my father which basically disowned me and said, if you don't, you made us sound like hillbillies, you made me sound like a horrible father, and the only thing you're right about was the fact that I'm in my happy place now on my farm in South Africa. And I was absolutely devastated. I just thought, oh my God, why did I not take my brother-in-law's advice and change it? So I just parked the book. I just thought, oh God, I'm not going anywhere with this. I'm not going to do anything with it. It's just too painful for everybody involved. And it sat there for a while, probably a month or two. And I went back to it, having apologised profusely to my father, and rewrote great swathes of it. I just thought, I don't want to be a nasty person. And it seems like I've accidentally drifted into that place. And I thought, I just want to be kind. So I rewrote it in a much kinder way, sent it back to my dad, who said, this is much better. I'm happy for you to publish if that's what you want to do. So that's when I started sending off to various different publishing houses, and they're all different. They all want something different. Some want a covering letter, some want a synopsis, some want the first 5,000 words, some want the first chapter, some want this, some want that. And I had to start a spreadsheet to say, what they wanted and who I'd sent it to. And I just got rejection after rejection. I sort of feel that, as an unknown author with a very unusual topic, unless you can capture the imagination somehow, you're not going to get published. So I ended up going through a publisher and doing what they call hybrid publishing. So basically you pay for the work to be done. So you pay for them to edit and to do various other things. So the editing, I have to say, was absolutely shocking. It was just an appalling experience, and it made me anxious, angry, frustrated that I'd paid all this money and my work had been put through some sort of program that changed all the whiches to that and changed all my speech punctuation, so it capitalized the word she after the comma and inverted commas, and I was just so frustrated with it all. But in the end, we got to a place where I thought it was as good as it was going to be. I spent hours undoing the work that had been done by this program and never really got anything back from the editors, except if you keep making changes, you will delay your publishing date. Not, sorry, we made a mess of this, but I recently have parted company with the publishers and have self-published on Amazon. And I was able to take back the manuscript, and there were still mistakes in it even when it got to publishing. They didn't check for those. So I was able to correct those and publish again. Hopefully this time it will be better. But yes, it was not a fun experience, put it that way.
Least in some respects, you had the confidence in yourself to, I mean, you would know what you're getting back isn't good from that editing process. Most writers would have that ability to look at it and go, no, we've lost something. It's not the way it should be, basic errors, etc. But for you to actually have the confidence to go, no, this is just really bad. I think that's an important message to give new writers, is to try to know actually that a good editor, if you're working with a good editor, is there to be challenged as much as accepted. They're not expecting you just to do what they say.
Yeah. Well, the different types of editing as well, isn't there? That and it can be very subjective. I get if you want to get your sentence level right. I've got one editor who's editing a book that I've done in my own name, and he has real problems with, what do you call them, hanging clauses. And I don't like the Oxford comma, but I should have had a conversation with the editor before she started putting them all in, because I had to then take them all out again. And it's things you learn. It's the experience that you have, is that you know what you're doing and you know what you want your writing to look like. And actually what you want an editor to do is do the line edit and click. So for example, have you got the name right? I'd changed the name of one of my characters in a different book from one thing to the other by the end of the book, and the editor hadn't picked it out. So anyway, editing is not the best part of writing.
No, and there's a lot of literature out there about writing that says that writing is editing, or there's that feeling that there's the drafting of the first piece that you write, and then you spend the rest of your time sort of fighting and wrestling with what you have and adjusting it and changing it. And in fact, in the two previous podcasts that we've had, in the first one, David Hendy, I think he said he discarded about 75,000 words from one of his books. And then Holly laughed and said, no, much nearer. I think she called him a lightweight, bless her. She said, no, I got rid of about 150,000 easily. So the bar has been set, Molly. Yeah. How many words do you think were lost, retained, worked through from beginning to end with your book?
Do you know, I don't think it was that many. Maybe I am not as experienced as those other writers, but other than the big change that I made was changing it from first to third person. So that was probably a bit like losing a lot of words, because that's really hard to do. And you've got to check that every us is now them, and that was really hard. So yes, I replaced a lot of words. So I did lose a lot as well. A lot of first person pronouns disappeared, but that was hard work.
I can only imagine, actually, just before we get onto the first and third person, because that's fascinating to have to make that change alone, to make that decision. I'd love to unpack in a moment. But also it's important, I think, again, for those people in the audience of this podcast to know that as writers, there is, again, a lot of diversity in how much of it changes, how much of it discards. Because I have spoken to authors, again, outside of the podcast, who have been horrified at having to lose that many words and think that can actually happen. I think it's one of those things where people are different. How they write is different. How they create is different. In fact, I think Holly called it a wonderful mess when you're creating, you're writing, and be prepared to make a mess, because art is messy, which I thought was a lovely way of looking at it when we're all trying to create the perfect process that's minimal and smooth and sleek and just works, and actually it should be messy. But let's come back to that first to third person switch. Can you explain why that was important for you to put that work in to your book?
So I had a beta reader, which is somebody who will read your work for you before you go to publishing. And the beta reader said that I wonder if it would work better in third person. And I had a good think about it. And I thought, you know what, that adds another layer of protection almost between the story and me as an individual. So I went ahead with it and I did it. And then I published it, and a couple of people said, you know what, it was much more powerful in first person. And I was like, God, have I made the right decision? So I was beating myself up about it until I went to the Blandford Literary Festival. Actually, it was a Women's Day festival, International Women's Day Festival. And there was a woman there, and she was giving a talk, and it was a holistic talk. And one of the questions came up and said, you know, when I write, sometimes I use myself as inspiration. And I thought, well, yeah, that's exactly what I did with this book. And I feel a bit bad about using myself, and maybe I should write in first person. And she said, no, actually, if you write in third person, it means that you can explore and unpack emotions from a safer place. She said it protects you. It means that you can look at that individual almost impassionately. Is that the word I mean? No. As if they're somebody else. So instead of being I am Susie. So I can look at Susie behaving in that way, and it gives me an extra layer of protection. It makes me think, oh, well, I didn't do that really. Susie does it, not me. And I think it was right to change it to third person, and it's right to almost detach myself from the story, because it gives me a place of safety and security, and I can look at the story and not be so emotionally involved with it.
Did much of the story change? The sort of the scenes that you were going to navigate through, as you switched that perspective, did that open up more possibilities to talk about things, or did it reduce in any way?
I think it enabled me to explore why Susie was thinking that way, rather than this is me thinking that. I mean, there's a particular episode in the book where Susie is drifting, and she can feel herself drifting into a sense of depression after she moves back from the Middle East to the UK and back into almost exactly the same life that she had left. And at the same time, you know, still not having a great relationship with her father, and her husband's working away, and she starts drinking, and she can't stop drinking that bottle of wine, and then goes to open another one, and then drink and dials a friend. And as I was writing it, I was like, was that really me? Because I think I'm fairly sure I've moved on from that now, but I can explore how that felt and how Susie was feeling at that particular moment in time. It enables you to explore emotions without them being too personal.
Yeah. I mean, it's still mind-blowing, I think, to me, to think of writing about something that's so intimate, for want of a better word. It's the sort of thing that's populated in diaries and even, should we say, somewhat perhaps dramatized diaries and fictionalized diaries that have been released over the many decades, those sorts of things. But to write such a memoir, when you were traversing the subjects of it, I've got a couple of questions about how you remembered and recalled some of those moments and how you went and re-explored them. But related to that very much so is the pain of going back over those things. It's a cathartic experience, but it sounds, to me at least, like it would still have a lot of potential for re-experience of pain that led to trauma, potentially as well. Did you find that as you were writing?
Was a moment at which I decided to put flashbacks in to try and show the relationship between Susie and her father. And the flashbacks were the hardest thing to write. Even now I'm welling up, because Susie and her father had a really good relationship until her teenage years. And then that sort of fractured, and now the relationship is, you know, the odd WhatsApp message and a photograph of the new cow. But, you know, there was a point in Susie's life where she was going to go and live with her father, and writing those made me sad for the relationship that was no longer there. And I think that was the hardest part for me. And there were points at which I had to walk away from the screen, because I just couldn't do it anymore.
That was actually what I was just about to ask as well. Did you get to any points where walking away from the screen is one thing, but did you ever feel that you needed to walk away from it entirely? This is too hard.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote the first draft quite quickly, and that was without the flashbacks. And then once I thought, do you know what, I need to show the relationship between father and daughter. And when I went to put those flashbacks in, I did the first one and thought, oh God, I can't do this, because actually this is a really, like you say, traumatic time in my life. And do I need to do it? And do I want to do it? And those two things had to dovetail at some point. And there were a lot of breaks. I took a lot of breaks from this book, and I actually started writing something else in the meantime because I couldn't complete it. But I had some great support from my local writers group, and we would take sections of our book to the group once a month on a Thursday evening at the local pub, and they said, we're really enjoying this. You need to finish. And it gave me the inspiration and the impetus to complete it.
That's
And also a couple of really good friends said, just do it, just finish it. So I did.
I tell you what, now you have me welling up slightly, because it's so good to hear that when writers have that support group, whatever shape it takes. I think Holly's in the previous episode, had a few people that she trusted with the ideas. She trusted, because her point was that our ideas are really fragile in fiction. They can be completely dismissed by a poor reaction by somebody. And I guess when you're writing and fighting to write about something as important and close to you as what you were tackling as a first book as well, and you were having that support group, that writers group. I actually had a note already to ask you about who was in your corner when you were doing this. And it's so fantastic to hear that you had that, and you had good friends that could say,
Yeah.
keep
And
going.
my husband. Yeah.
Yes.
And my husband. He was very supportive.
Yeah. Did you have any detractors other than the reaction you got from, of course, your father? Did you have any detractors that you were challenged by when you were writing, or was it mostly positive?
It was mostly positive, but one of my sisters asked to be written out. She said, my daughter's of an age when, if this gets traction and if somebody says you're anti-trans because of some of the expressions you might have used in the book, she said, I don't want to be part of that. I really don't want to be in it, potentially a victim of any backlash. So I had to write her out. She did also say, I don't really understand why you're doing this. But when it was finished, she was very supportive, and she said, congratulations and well done. And she even bought me little coasters for my Christmas present saying, now a published author. So I think there was this fear that hasn't materialized, partly because I've only sold about 100 copies of the book that hasn't materialized, that there might be some backlash from people who think I'm being anti-trans, or people who think I'm being too pro-trans, but it hasn't got out there enough for that to have happened, and hopefully it won't.
I was going to say, I'm hoping that our listenership won't be the cause of anything like that. I would hope we'd be a kind crowd and a very welcoming crowd for them, just based on the sheer amount of emotional effort it would have taken to get through expressing the book itself. So I hope people appreciate that about what you've created.
Yeah.
It actually dovetails into another question, which is, now that the book is out there, and you've mentioned that it's sold some copies, and you should be very proud of anyone should be proud of anyone buying a copy of a work they've done. I've said that to a lot of people recently that I mentor on their writing, is don't worry if it's one person, you've reached one person. That's fantastic. And I wonder what sort of comments you've had, what the best comments you've had back.
So there's a lovely lady who's in her 80s who I go to yoga with, and she took me by the arm. She said, I've read your book. She said, I've read it. She said, I can't believe what that must have felt like. I can't imagine how I would have felt if it was my dad. And I said, well, I don't know, I think I've explored how I felt quite well. She said, you were so brave to write it. And then I was on the radio with transgender reporter on Radio Bath called Charlotte Hemingway. And Charlotte bought, sadly, when she transitioned, her family disowned her, but she bought 3 copies of the book and sent one each to each of her children in the hope that they would read it and maybe understand a bit more and maybe reconcile. They haven't yet, but there's hope. So yes, I have had some lovely feedback from people I don't really know very well. So it's all right, your family saying that was great, but if you get a stranger saying that book was mind blowing, or I can't believe that you laid your soul bare for the world, I think that's really lovely feedback and encouraging.
Absolutely encouraging. And I think perhaps one measure of a great writer is one that can say they've written down truth. They put the truth down on that page. I know there's a famous quote from Hemingway of, one true sentence, but there's also a lovely quote. I think it was Ray Bradbury. I was watching a quote from him earlier on today where he said he has one note above his typewriter, and that note says, "Don't think." And he explained why. He said, it's not because if I think I won't write, it's because I won't write the truth. If I don't think about who I'm writing for, if I just write, if I just put it down, then I'll probably say something true because I don't have time to change it before it gets there. And actually that leads into a question I had around how you wrote. So many people out there struggle to find the time to write. They struggle to find the perfect moment to write. Again, I joked on some of the other podcast episodes about how certainly I've found over the books I've written that the more I've written, the more I try and seek the perfect moment, perfect process, the perfect lighting, the perfect, ambience to write, all of which is a pipe dream and largely distracting from actually writing. What's your preferred habits of writing? Anything there you wouldn't mind sharing with the audience?
So like I said, I started writing on a laptop in a motorhome while my husband was walking the Hadrian's Wall. But then that continued and I just sat at my dining room table and words come to you in the night. And I woke up one morning and I was like, I know what I'm going to do. And I'd had this idea about, it wasn't so much an idea, it was a memory. So it's not completely factual. Some of it is a bit fictional. So I had this memory of a morning that I'd gone into work, and I used to teach soldiers in Oman. So there's this whole episode where and I remember one of them, and his grammar wasn't particularly good. And I woke up thinking, I remember what he said. He'd used the second conditional. If you don't feel well, you should go to the clinic. And I thought, that's going in the book. So the writing process, sometimes you are led by a memory or a thought or a sentence that comes to you in the shower or walking along the road or cooking the dinner. I'm chopping an onion thinking, oh, do you know what? I can make a sentence. Oh, yes, I've got that. And you have to leave what you're doing and write it down very quickly. So my writing was quite erratic. Sometimes I would write 10,000 words in a day, and then I might not do anything for a week. So another thing that this lovely woman at the festival on Saturday said was that we are cyclical beings. So everything you do happens in cycles. So once I'd finished Dad's New Dress, I almost immediately started on another book, which I finished really quickly within about 3 months. And it was like suddenly it was there. The book sort of wrote itself. And then I was like, oh, I've got another idea. So I started writing that one, and that one wrote itself in about 6 months. And now I can't do anything. Now I'm stuck. So obviously my cycle finished. I don't know when it'll start again.
That's interesting to think of it as cyclical, because I can imagine panic setting in after being so arguably prolific.
Yeah.
Right? And then suddenly it stops. That could be really scary.
I'm like, I can't write anything.
Yes. Well, that's it. I mean, but you seem to be, and maybe this is because of what you heard at the weekend, but you seem to be have an accommodation with it. Is that true? Are you okay with it at the moment?
Well, yeah, because there's other things going on in my life at the moment. We've got local elections coming up, and I'm a councillor, and I want to be a counsellor again. So, that's really important. And, there's all sorts of other bits of part of your life that become more important, like spending time with your family and my sons particularly. And then I'll look at my calendar and I think, I've got a day free there. I'll do some writing. So I come upstairs and instead of doing some writing, like today, I thought I've got a morning free. I'm going to use it. I'm going to start this next project that I have in my head. Did I heck? I messed around joined, what was it called? Something, Rest Less. I joined it and I entered a competition, sent a bit of writing in that I'd already done. And I'm like, this is not what you were going to be doing today. And so be it. But I've got another great idea actually in my head at the moment.
I won't ask you to share it because, well, that said, ideas can be fragile, and whatever anyone else wrote with that idea would be different than what you write anyway.
Yeah.
So we're in that beautiful position where there is no such thing as IP on these things, at least. But yeah, that's fabulous. So what I wanted to ask a little bit is about actually relates to that, not so much time management, but the sort of balance in your life. How important is reading to you as a writer, but also just generally as an activity? Is it something that features a lot in your life or not so much?
Oh, it always has. Yeah, I've got a degree in English literature. I was an English teacher for years. I love reading, but I like to go back to stuff as well. I was looking along my bookshelf and I thought, oh, look, I haven't read that book for years. I can't even remember what it's about. It's like somebody white called Voss. I thought, I remember reading it and thinking it was a bit peculiar. I wonder if I'll go back and read it again. So yeah, I've always got a book on the go and two more. I've just finished Normal People by Sally Rooney. I'm withholding judgment on that one. It's like, how does she get to be a Sunday Times bestseller?
Well, when we get Sally on the podcast, we'll ask her. But you obviously reading's a massive passion.
Yeah.
Are you looking forward to reading anything this year? Do you look ahead and think, I'm going to read that thing that's coming out soon? Or do you take inspiration from what's already on the shelves? Or is it a mixture of all and above?
I go with recommendations. I'm in a book group as well, and I've just started reading something, and the name I can't remember, about a botanist who has lots of poisonous plants and is also a little bit of a voyeur watching the woman who lives over the road from her. And I can't remember what it's called. But yeah, I take recommendations from other people. And also, I volunteer in a charity shop, and I quite often have to overdate the books, which means take the old ones off and put the new ones on. So if I like the look of something, I will buy that one. So it's secondhand books a lot of the time.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Or I'll pick them up, when you go on holiday, I'll do a book swap. So, and I did a swap with a friend of mine actually when we were recently on holiday, and I picked up, and she gave me a Tracy Chevalier, which is something about a single thread. It's brilliant. It's prompted me to buy a ticket to go to a literary lunch in London where she's speaking.
Wonderful. It may borrow that link as well to see if there's any remaining tickets to go and see that sort of thing, because I love those lunch type situations.
And it was a bit of a bargain, I thought. £80 or £79, you get 3 authors, 3-course meal and wine.
That does not sound bad at all. London Library, are you listening? Because when I've been to those sorts of events, I don't remember 3 courses. Fantastic. Getting back to your writing, just as we start to come to the close today, I'd love to know if there's anything you would like to share to people who are considering writing perhaps a memoir. So to write something that's as, I'm going to say, confessional, intimate, hard to put down on that page, that you struggle with and actually achieved, what are the things you would say to someone like that?
I think you need to mentally prepare yourself, because when I started writing, I didn't realize quite how emotionally draining it would be. So you need to build in lots of breaks. You need to build in lots of self-care. I mean, I got to the end of my book, and the emotions that had been raked up were so strong that my husband said, I'm going to have to put you into therapy. Be aware that if you're writing about something that's emotionally raw, that you need to look after yourself, because it's not just words. It really isn't just words on a page. It is so much more than that. And you need to look after yourself.
I have another question. I've never asked the next question of
Okay.
anybody, so I'm going to try this out. See if you like this question. Is there any question that you wish you had been asked, particularly about this book or your writing process? Is there anything you can think of that you go, I wish they'd get round to this, and they never do, these podcast interviewers and other people that waste my time? And what would that question be? And then perhaps what your answer might be.
Do you know what? I don't know. You've put me on the spot here. How did it feel? How did it feel as a young person to have 7 stepmothers?
Okay. That's an incredible question. I'm not going to ask the question. I'm going to let you answer it, because that's a question that no one would dream up. So that's my only defense.
Okay.
But yeah, so that question to you, what would you answer?
So obviously I would have preferred my father to have stayed married to my mother, but that didn't happen. I always felt very protective towards my dad, and I really wanted each one of those wives to be the one. So each time a new one came along, it was like, oh, please, I hope you're this. Please be the one. Please be the one. Because all this time we didn't know that Dad was hiding his desire to be a woman, which was what was root cause of the 7 wives. So yes, it was quite tough, because it felt like the roles were reversed, and I wanted my dad to be happy. I really wanted my dad to be happy. And I think that's how it felt most of the time. Is this the one?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing something like that. Apologies for putting you on the spot with make up your own questions. It sounds like I'm doing nothing here, which is probably true. So,
I mean, that question proves that somebody's read the book.
Yes, of course. Of course.
I think that's what makes me think it's a question that should be asked, because my husband thinks that's the most interesting thing about the book, is that here's a man who had 7 wives and now he's a woman and has a husband.
Yes, you can see a certain seeking. I'm going to call it a seeking perhaps through that. And I can only imagine how difficult that would have been for you, for you and your sisters, to navigate that. It's incredibly, complicated, I think is one word for it. One last question for you today, Molly, if I may. Going back in time to you when you were younger, and now, because this is a memoir, and because it's full of so many difficult emotions, this question might take on more gravitas than it usually does. Because normally I'd say, what would you do to go back to a 16-year-old you and say to you that would help you wrestle with your writing? What's a piece of advice you want to give back to your 16-year-old self? But in your case, Molly, I'd really like to ask that question more broadly. If you could go back to yourself before perhaps all of this, everything that's led to what you wrote about as well, is there anything you would have said to you that you think would have given you some heart, given you some strength, been a gift to give yourself back then?
Probably brace yourself. It's going to be a rough ride.
Brace yourself. That is perfect. Thank you, Molly. Thank you so much for your time today. It's enormously appreciated, everyone that comes on the podcast. And I can honestly say, certainly for something where we're navigating such difficult material and a memoir, thank you so much for making the time today.
Thank you for having me on your podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Eastbourne Literary Festival's podcast. We'll be trying to put out an episode like this relatively regularly as we get used to doing it. Thanks for hanging in there with us. If you'd like to be involved in the festival or in any way would like to show your support for it, please visit eastbourneliteraryfestival.com. The links will be going out with the podcast episode. Me and the team are always looking for new folks to get involved as we bring this hopefully incredible festival to life.